Hello and welcome to the LSE for this online event. My name is Lucinda Platt and I'm Professor of Social Policy and Sociology in the Department of Social Policy here at the LSE. I'm delighted to welcome Baroness Ros Altmann, CBE, for this discussion of women's pensions and the gender pensions gap. Ros Altmann is a leading UK authority on later life issues, with around 40 years' experience in all aspects of pensions, retirement and old age incomes. She's a recognised authority in the area of later life and the complexities of pension provision. Ros received her PhD in economics from the LSE and was a Kennedy Scholar at Harvard, working on pensions with the US National Bureau of Economic Research. After her PhD pension thesis, she began a city career managing pension fund assets. She ran the international equities investment operations at Chase Manhattan Bank London and was a director at NM Rothschild and then at NatWest. With the birth of her third child, she set up an independent consultancy, advising governments, the pensions industry and pension funds on policy and investment strategy, including sitting on several pension fund boards and investment committees. Ros was UK Minister of State for Pensions from 2015 to 2016. She was business champion for older workers for the coalition government from 2014 to 15, and was Director General of Over 50 Specialist Saga from 2010 to 2013. She was awarded a CBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours in 2014 for services to pensioners and pension provision. She has 2 honorary doctorates awarded for her work on pension investment. For many years, Ros has championed pensions justice, and she led a successful campaign to help 150,000 people receive compensation when their occupational pension schemes collapsed. Her work was instrumental in setting up the system of UK pension protection and the Pension Protection Fund. Ros is currently visiting professor in practice in the Social Policy Department here at the LSE. In today's conversation, we're going to be focusing on the topic of how to address inequalities in women's pension provision and levelling up in late life incomes. The session is expected to last for about an hour in total. And for those Twitter users in the audience, the hashtag for today's event is hashtag LSE Pensions Gap. This online event is being recorded and will hopefully be made available as a podcast, subject to no technical difficulties. As usual, there'll be the chance for you to put your questions to Ros. To submit your questions, please use a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be submitted to me, and I will pose as many as possible to Ros. Please let us know your name and affiliation. We're particularly keen to hear from students and alumni, so please do let us know. But before I ask Ros to explain the gender pensions gap, I'd just like to hold a quick poll of all those here. So the poll should be being put up before you now to ask 2 questions. So if you could answer those 2 questions and submit your answers, we'll see how many people are actively thinking about and planning for their retirement. Okay, so that's interesting. So over half of you do know how much income you can expect to live on in retirement, though we didn't ask how much. And 2/3 of you are taking active steps to help ensure you have a sustainable income on retirement. But that still leaves quite a substantial proportion who are not thinking about the pensions at present. But maybe you will more at the end of the session today. So now let's move on to the discussion. Ros, thanks again for being here to discuss this critical issue. I wanted to start my question with a very straightforward one. We hear a lot of discussion about the gender pay gap. So I wondered if you could just start by explaining what the gender pensions gap is and how large it is.
Thank you, Lucinda, and thank you for that lovely introduction and also for putting on this event. I think LSE is doing such brilliant work, and the Social Policy Department is a really important part of our policy framework in this country. I also would say that the gender pensions gap stems partly from the gender pay gap, but is much, much broader than that. So the gender pay gap, we've made big progress, and still the gap between earnings for men and women, even in full-time work, is around 17% or 20%, somewhere around that level. The gender pensions gap is at least twice as much as that. And that's not just because women earn less than men, so their private pensions will be lower, or work in lower paid jobs, or have lower lifetime earnings because they take career breaks. Part of the issue is that women lose out relative to men in their state pension as well. And it just seems to me that policymakers have never adequately focused on the gap between women and men's pension provision. Women are almost an afterthought sometimes in policy, and the state pension gender gap isn't even expected to be filled with the new state pension that came in 2016, for example, until the 2040s. So there seems to be some kind of tacit acceptance that women don't need as big a pension as men, which of course, when you're talking about the state pension, which for some people is their only pension income, especially for older women, I think there is a real issue here of a lack of attention at policymakers. The average gap between men and women's pensions is around £7,500 a year, which means over a typical retirement from, let's say, age 60, 65, women are going to have at least £250,000 less than men to sustain them through retirement. And there aren't even really proper official estimates of this pensions gap, which again, I think suggests that, you know, the government has not taken it seriously. There isn't regular reporting as there is required to be for the gender pay gap now for employers, for example. They have to regularly report on it. But the government doesn't have to regularly report or force others to regularly report on the pension gender gap.
So the implications of this very large gap that you've outlined, so that suggests that the risks of poverty are very different for older men and women. Is that the case?
Absolutely, absolutely. The vast majority of older single women, and they are, again, the majority of, let's say, the over 80s, the people at advanced older ages who are living in poverty are women. The majority of them are women, and the majority of them will be more likely to be women who are in poverty than men. So there is a real problem in terms of supporting women in the later stages of their lives, which dates back many decades ago to the origins of our social welfare system, but is also impacted by elements such as an increasing number of women not having a partner, even in the early stages of their retirement, and women who are divorced don't tend to get the best deal on pensions when they are doing a divorce settlement, for example. They tend to go for the house and ignore the fact that actually a pension could be worth more than your house. So, you know, I think the predominance of women in lower skilled, lower paid roles, you know, 80% of workers in low paid care and leisure sectors, for example, are women. The lack of seniority of women and the predominance of them in part-time work has led to this position where not only are women less able to build up a private pension, they have also lost out in the state pension and end up more likely to be in poverty in later life. And there are things we can do about it, but so far it just seems to be almost accepted that, of course, women are going to have less pension than men.
And this is, I mean, these older women we're talking about, you indicated some of the sort of lifetime factors that had led to this situation, and also the sort of family structures, so whether or not they're single, whether or not they're divorced, and presumably whether or not they're widowed as well. But is this is a case for women whose working lives are long over? What about today's women? Is it going to be different, or are they still falling between the cracks?
Unfortunately, there are still so many ways in which women fall through the cracks, and women are not in line for as good a pension as men. that again still applies to the state pension, which I find utterly astonishing. You know, if we have a welfare state which is meant to give people a decent pension as a basic underpin, we already have the lowest state pension in the developed world. The idea that this large group, you know, that at least half of the population is still unable to accrue as much state pension as a man of the same age seems to me to be a failing of social policy. And, you know, that there are holes in our national insurance contribution system. The state pension now works just on national insurance contributions. There used to be elements of earnings linking in the old system, and obviously women would have lost out to some degree, although there were mitigations tried to put in for low earners. But even now, there are women who don't realise that they will be disadvantaged in their state pension because they fall through some of the qualifying cracks. If, for example, you've got a woman, and this is really important for anyone in the audience who might not have recognised it. If you're a woman and you take time out to have children, and you are clued up enough to know that child benefit is no longer an automatic universal benefit, you have to claim child benefit. And if you're in a household that owns over more than £50,000, whether that's from both partners or one, you will not be entitled. And by 60,000, you won't have any child benefit. So if you know that you're not entitled to child benefit, of course, normally the woman wouldn't bother to claim it. The problem is that our pension system works on the basis of you needing to make a claim for a child benefit payment you know you can't have in order to get credit on your national insurance record for 1 year of state pension. If you're a woman, and it tends to be women, who works part-time and is earning less than the national insurance lower earnings limit in, say, 2 or 3 jobs, which again, you know, you're talking of tens of thousands or more women who are in that position. Again, they're still working. They get no credit for their state pension. So they could end up losing out in later life unwittingly. And the system doesn't allow you to backdate very far. So yes, you get credit for staying at home and caring. You can also get credit for caring for grandchildren. But unless people know what the rules are and how they need to claim, or unless the system allows them to backdate a claim if they discover later that they missed out, it is going to be more women who will still lose out in their state pension.
So there's so there's a lot of gaps in potential gaps in the record for women relative to men in the state pension, even though it's ostensibly equal. So, but as you said, the state pension is very low by international standards. What about private pension provision? What's the story there? Is it as similar?
Private pension provision disadvantages women much more than it disadvantages than the state pension disadvantages them. Because a private pension is almost wholly dependent on the amount you earn, the gender pay gap and the predominance of women in lower paid work or being lower earners who may not be automatically enrolled into their employer pension, and even if they are, there'll be less money going in for them, they will automatically be on track for a lower pension. There's no provision within, let's say, maternity leave. Yes, you can get maternity pay, but you don't have to pay into a pension. And I must say, I was very pleased to see that the government in furlough protected automatic enrolment pension contributions. But in maternity leave or carers leave, I would love to see a system where women's pension contributions are also maintained, not just receiving some pay replacement, Whether that comes from the employer or your partner, if you have one, I mean, those are issues that could be addressed, but unless people start to think about it, nothing much is going to happen. And that means when women take time out for reasons that society wants them to and may even encourage them to, they end up losing out as a result, on top of the problem of lower lifetime earnings and private pensions being linked to pay, which means they automatically are likely to end up with less pension than an equivalent man.
So these are sort of quite fundamental issues and inequalities facing not only the current generation of older women, but also the current generation of working age women. So I'm getting the sense that you think that some rather radical reform might be needed rather than sort of incremental solutions. What would you suggest?
Well, I certainly think that if we want to close the gender pensions gap and address much more realistically the problem of poverty among pensioners, and particularly women pensioners, then we need a radical new approach. And for example, the old beverage system, our whole welfare state, was designed in the 1940s when life was so different. You know, in those days, it might have been considered reasonable to just assume that a woman could rely on a man in later life and even through her life to support her. And that is one of the bases on which our national insurance system was built. So it wasn't really designed to cater for women to have pensions in their own right. They were kind of tagged on to their husbands' pensions. And in fact, 40 or 50 years ago, when a woman got married, it was perfectly fine for her employer to require her to leave the company pension scheme, as if she wouldn't need it, because now she was married, she was going to get a pension from her husband, and that was fine. Well, I think the deal has changed now. And without our national insurance system recognizing two things: one, that women need just as much pension as men in their own right as part of the societal contract, especially the pension from the state as the underpin, and also that a pension is not in and of itself enough to pay for what you need in retirement, which in Beveridge's time, it was considered to be. You know, in the Beveridge days, you stopped work at 60 or 65, and then you had maybe 5 or 10 years, and you were then either continuing to be well, which was lucky, or you got ill and you passed away. The idea of millions of people living for possibly decades, not in good health, and maybe not able to live independently, but able to live and just need some extra support, was never factored into our state welfare system, and still isn't. So a pension is designed to give you normal spending income for when you're living independently. There's no provision for the 1 in 3 or so older people in their advanced later life who are likely to need to have extra money to pay someone else to look after them. So a redesign could start with finding ways to have a national care system incorporated in the pension system. That would be really radical, and I think is really the ultimate purpose of pensions. You know, if you think about it, when Beveridge designed the original state pension, it was meant to be a kind of welfare support for people who could no longer work, and their families would look after them if needed. we now need a system that recognizes the fundamental changes in people's lives and in society's organization, so that when people are building up money for later life during their working life, and the state is making available opportunities for that, it needs to look at more than just a level of income that might be okay to avoid abject poverty for a number of years, plus extra private money that can support people either for a better lifestyle in later life, or if they need help because they can't live independently, to facilitate that. And we've never had this discussion. We're still waiting for the government's proposals. And it could be that we use pensions for that. The other radical thought, which I'm hoping might get some traction, revolves around the state pension age itself. The government has created enormous difficulties for millions of women across the country who were always brought up to think that they were going to get their state pension at age 60 and planned perhaps to retire at that age, or maybe even stopped work around then to care for elderly loved ones. And it's typically the woman that is doing both childcare and elderly care at both ends of their lives. And suddenly the deal changed. And because average life expectancy was rising, and that's a big success of social and health policy, of course, the government in 1995 decided that it would be prudent to plan for a rise in pension age for women to reach that of men, partly because there was this feeling that the state pension itself was becoming expensive, and you had all these baby boomers who didn't have enough children. So the pay-as-you-go contract was in perhaps a little bit of jeopardy. But also, you've got this position where, as women go through their lives, they make plans for what they're going to do later on, and they are likely to live longer than men. So the male policymakers, and it tended to be male policymakers, and they tended to be based in London, thought it was perfectly reasonable for women and men to have the same state pension age, especially as women, in theory, would get more. What they meant was women would get their pension for longer. Actually, they'd get less because they'd get less each year, perhaps. But anyway, so why not at least start at the same age? The big issue that has caused a problem is not just that women weren't told about this major change, you know, a somewhat serious oversight on the part of government. But even worse than that, I feel, is that this policy, which is based on average life expectancy, doesn't recognize or factor in the vast differences in life expectancy, and indeed in healthy life expectancy, across our country. And the most recent figures, which I found shocking, stark, and contribute significantly to the problems caused for women by the sudden increase in state pension age that they didn't know about. Of course, not all women have a problem. You know, I knew about it. I was in pensions, and most of my friends knew about it or could plan to work longer. But there are significant numbers of women across our country, those in the least deprived areas, have seen their average life expectancy, healthy life expectancy, reach around 70 now. But those in the most deprived areas are still having an average healthy life expectancy only to age 50. So you've got this 20-year differential in healthy life expectancy, but a policy that says to women who are becoming more and more unhealthy from age 50 in the most deprived areas, well, because there are all these other people whose life expectancy and healthy life expectancy has been increasing around the country, you're going to have to wait longer for your state pension. Tough luck. And I don't believe that's the mark of a progressive social policy or a sensible way to manage pensions, because what this does is it forces people who are not fit and well enough to work the older they get to try and keep working when their health will be impacted, but more also, if they don't have a job, to keep looking for a job in a market that we all know is still, unfortunately, badly affected by age discrimination. And the group which finds it hardest to get back into work is often older women, if they're out of the labour market for a while at the later end of their working careers. So I think a radical change for me would be to go away from this idea of a sort of one size fits all, and because average life expectancy is coming, there's just this one magic age at which you start getting your pension. If you're not well enough for 3 or 4 years before, and even if you die, then you get 0. But actually within our system, there's only flexibility for those that are healthy and wealthy enough to wait longer. There's no flexibility for those who are unable to work, not healthy, don't have any other pension money. It's just tough.
So what could be done? How could this be addressed? This issue that with differential life expectancy, differential expectations of pension.
Yeah, I think there are a number of factors that we can look at to address in terms of policy. One would be to have a flexible age range around a central point at which people can get their pensions sooner. In private pensions, there is a facility to take earlier pension, even if it's at a reduced rate. And there is also provision for serious ill health pensions, for example. The state system doesn't have anything like that. And of course, out of work benefits are only about half the value of the basic state pension, which, as I say, is itself the lowest in the developed world. So I think recognition within the state pension system of serious illness and inability to work, which can move people sooner onto a state pension, coupled perhaps with recognition of an exceptionally long working life. At the moment, you get a full state pension with just 35 years of contributions. Now, there's no way in this day and age that 35 years is a full working life. If you start at age 20 after higher education, by 55, you're not even close to finishing work unless you're not well, for most people. So perhaps we need to recognize that in terms of controlling the costs of state pension, a much better and fairer socially system would recognize a proper full working life. And thereby, if people wanted to take the state pension before they had a full record, they could take it, but it would be reduced for the number of years shortfall, which happens, but only from state pension age at the moment. And also builds in some recognition of health status, which is ignored completely in the policy elements of state pension age management. The other thing that I think could be done is to move away from the triple lock on state pensions. The cost of the triple lock is more than adding around 1 year to state pension age. So if you drop the triple lock, you'd take the pressure off the Treasury keeping on wanting to increase state pension age. You know, we've got a review coming up shortly of state pension age again. I certainly would hope that there is no further increase, but I am suspecting that the Treasury is keen to move to age 70 sooner rather than later. Well, as I've described, that leaves many women and indeed men who are not healthy from age 50 in dire straits. And there's no recognition at the moment of that.
So yes, I think that's really interesting, this idea of this flexible pension age. What I'm not understanding, I think, is if people cannot accrue enough, if part of the issue is that people are not accruing enough across working life in order to build up a good pension entitlement, how is that going to an earlier retirement? How is an early retirement going to provide enough to sustain them in later life?
Well, the state pension certainly should not be earnings related. You know, the assumption must be if you got a credit on your national insurance record, either because you were working, regardless of whether you were working full-time, part-time, high pay, low pay, or because you were caring and not earning but still contributing to society, that is fully recognized in the state pension. So I'm just talking for the minute about getting parity in the state pension. You know, we're not even there yet. So that would mean recognizing equally the contribution of all women in our national insurance system for state pension. The trickier bit, but we haven't even cracked the state pension one yet, which is the easy one, potentially, certainly theoretically. The trickier bit is, well, that's all very well, and they'll have a good underpin at least. But then the bit that they have on top in private pensions is bound to be lower for women if it's related to earnings. And that's much harder to get around. So I think the policy of automatic enrolment within workplace pensions is great because it's extended the coverage of private pensions to millions of workers who weren't in pensions at all before. But it's not done anything for the adequacy of those private pensions for those people who are accruing money. And in fact, there's significant evidence that actually the per person pension building up has been lowered since auto-enrollment started, partly because defined benefit schemes have closed, and partly because employers themselves, because they're paying into pensions for far more workers, are paying less per worker. So they've dumbed down to the automatic enrolment minimum. And that automatic enrolment minimum is not going to give you a very generous private pension. It will be a start. So when it comes to private pensions, I think there is an opportunity for women to take more of an active role in thinking about and planning how much they want or need for their future. If they have a partner, planning that when they're young together with their partner is important. You know, the idea of a partner paying into his partner's pension, for example, if they're earning very different amounts because one is at home and one is not, should make sense. But of course, with our current system of pensions tax relief, it's the highest earner who's better off putting more into their pension because they get much more in tax relief. For every £3 they put into a pension, if they're a 40% taxpayer, the government adds another £2. Whereas if some of that money went to the female partner who may be earning much less and only on basic rate tax or no tax, she would only get the 20p uplift. So for every 80p she puts in, she'll get another 20p. So clearly there are inbuilt barriers to equality between women and men within the private pension system, aside from just the earnings element, which will always be prevalent, I suspect. And it could be part of family financial planning, if you like, for men and women to talk about how they're going to share the responsibility for retirement provision and plan for it. And I would certainly be in favour of a government change to the incentive structure for pensions, which makes it much more progressive, or at least equal, rather than the regressive system we currently have, which, of course, if it's based on tax relief in a progressive tax system, you're going to have a regressive incentive mechanism. But that is another big radical piece of work.
Yes, that's
By the way, women who work in the public sector, of course, and that's about 20% of the workforce, do have much better pension provision than men, although in the public sector there is still a pay gap, and therefore overall the amount of pension they build up will be less than a man of the same age, because the men tend to have higher pay. It's a much lower differential, and the women in the public sector are still on track generally for much better pensions than women in the private sector altogether.
Yeah. So there's something maybe to be learned from the different sectors as well, in terms of equalising possibilities. I just wanted, we've talked about state pension, private pension. I just wanted to talk very briefly, before we move on to questions, about sort of the third bit, which is for those older people who don't have sufficient income to live off, there's pension credit. And I think the government spends about 5 billion a year on pension credit currently, but non-take-up is a very big issue. So I think around 40% non-take-up, which is very high, even though pension credit also acts as a gateway to other benefits, other resources. So there seems to be a sort of a problem in the pension credit system.
So, very much so.
Yeah.
You know, that is such an important issue, Lucinda, and I would like to make a plea to anyone listening here today. If you know any older people who may be struggling to make ends meet, or if they are living on less than about £9,000 a year income, they need to look at claiming pension credit, because the money is there waiting for them. They are entitled to it, but it is the lowest take-up of any of our means tested benefits by far. The take-up rate hasn't changed since 2010. The government clearly hasn't done enough to try and encourage more people to claim. And families, neighbours, friends, you know, after lockdown, when older people have been isolated and sort of had such difficult times, maybe we could have a silver lining as the outcome from this period, whereby lots of us help neighbours, friends, loved ones who might be able to benefit from pension credit to actually apply. A lot of older people feel it's demeaning to apply for means testing, or they don't like to fill in the forms, or they find it too difficult. And some of them think, well, I've got savings, so I'm not entitled, or think, well, I'm only going to get a couple of pounds a week, it's not worth the bother. But actually, as you said there, Lucinda, firstly, if you've got up to £10,000 in savings, you can still be eligible. Secondly, even if you get £1 or £2 a week pension credit, that is the gateway to so many other benefits worth thousands of pounds potentially. You can get free council tax, you can get help with care if you need it, you can get discounts off your energy bills, cold weather payments, free dental treatment and eye treatment and other health benefits. You even get, if you're over 75, a free TV license. But if you don't know about it, you will end up spending money when actually the government is waiting there to give it to you. You know, it's yours as of right, but a lot of older people are not getting it.
Yeah, yes, it's an important sort of action issue. It sounds to me, I'm going to move over to the Q&A shortly, but it sounds to me as if you see that there's an ongoing role, even within the radical reforms you're suggesting, for a means-tested element in the incomes of older people. But maybe this is something we can pick up further in the Q&A.
Yeah, I'm not keen on the idea of ongoing means testing, I must admit, because it disincentivizes private saving.
So while you think people should be
that
now, then maybe you'd like to see reforms which take out the need for that pension.
Yes, I mean, the aim of the new state pension originally was to lift everyone above the means testing threshold, so everyone can be advised that it's good to put money into a pension. Unfortunately, because of the complexities within the way the new system interacts with the old system and the changeover, which is taking 20 years or so, there is this ongoing issue of means testing for older pensioners. I would have liked to see a citizen's pension. We have it already for the over 80s, but it's only £82.45 a week. And a lot of older women, by the way, are not getting this citizen's pension. You know, they're automatically, regardless of their NI record, entitled to this category D pension. And they don't claim it, or they're getting less than that and don't realize they're not getting enough. There's been a whole scandal recently about women who have not been getting the right state pension because the DWP either didn't give them enough information or was supposed to automatically increase their pension when their husband reached pension age, and for some reason didn't do so. And it's taken 10, 15 years for any of that to come to light. And those women have been living on less than they should for a long time. So, you know, a radical solution would be just paying the level of the full new state pension to all pensioners over a certain age, maybe 75 was my suggestion, even over 80 if you like. But that's just, you know, then you do away with means testing. And then there is merit in saying to everyone, the more you save, however much it is, you'll have extra than you would have had if you didn't bother to save.
Thank you for that. I'm going to now open the floor to the audience, because I'm sure there's lots of people who want to ask questions and I don't want to hog all the question time. So I have already a couple of questions that were sent ahead of time. So there's a question here from Michaela Hawkins and Anne Fenner. So this question is, how can pensions ever be levelled up to men's pension pots, which are 5 times the value without a woman's Bill of Rights? So do you want to take that?
I've tried to give an indication of some of the policy changes and lifestyle changes that could help redress the balance between men and women's pensions. And that does require a conversation among couples, for example, about sharing the pension between them, both sharing the contribution and of course sharing the ultimate pension. It does require, if couples separate, a discussion about fairly sharing the pension, which too often doesn't happen, and women just don't get their share of their former ex-husband's pension. I think building in some kind of automatic minimum contribution level from employers, regardless of whether women earn less than men, through the workplace pension system, is also a possibility, a kind of standard level of contribution in terms of money rather than just percentage of pay. That would be a lot more controversial and difficult. And it would probably require a very big change in the way government handles incentivization of pensions. My preference would be to make the automatic enrolment minimum contributions compulsory now. We've seen that opt-out rates are extraordinarily low. The vast majority of workers, 90% or more, when they're automatically put into a scheme, stay there. But there is the option to opt out. And if we were able to move to a position where automatic enrolment is the minimum, and then people are helped to understand the benefits and incentivized to put more money in above that level for themselves, I think both women and men could be attracted to the idea of pensions. The idea of making pensions exciting or engaging is probably leading to many people in the audience rolling their eyes and saying that ain't never going to happen. But I truly believe that we can get there with better engagement policies, better technology, better understanding and explanations of the really huge value that pensions can bring and the importance that they can play in people's lives. And for example, the power of pension money to boost the economy, to underpin the green growth agenda, to help infrastructure, social housing, all of these things that are so badly needed across our economy. And if people think their money is doing good, not just for themselves in maybe 40 years' time, but actually doing good for society as a whole, for the planet, for future generations as well in the meantime, then there is likely to be a much better feeling of warmth towards pensions. You know, there are other ideas that you could look at, such as
I'm aware that there's quite a few people wanting to come in. Can I move us on to another question?
Please do.
Even though I mean it's getting really interesting. So there's a question here from Bridget Green. It's also sent in Hedge. Says the interim result from the PHSO has been leaked. Will this affect any judgment made? And where do you think we can go next for true monetary justice? I'm hoping you understand the question.
I do. This is about the WASPI women, the 1950s women who suffered the increase in state pension age that I was talking about earlier and were never properly informed, and indeed some of them were misled by the DWP into not knowing anything about their state pension age, just were led to believe impliedly that their pension age would be 60 when it wasn't going to be. And then of course there was a second increase on top of that. The Parliamentary Ombudsman has looked at this, and the interim findings that we have been told about from the leak are that the DWP was guilty of maladministration and that it did not give women a fair chance to plan for a pension age of 60. It didn't inform them, even though this happened in 95. And this isn't a political issue, because it affects successive governments all the way from 1995. But it is possible, if maladministration is confirmed, that there would be some compensation recommended. But I have to say, I don't want to give anybody false hopes. I find it difficult to imagine that there will realistically be any award of each of these women's pensions back to age 60. I think the best that one could hope for is that women who can prove they were misled or would have made other plans might get some compensation. I've always wanted to try and offer pension credit to women who are facing hardship as a result of these decisions that were taken without letting them know. You know, the government did a survey, found out that in about 2004, millions of women had no idea that they were not going to get their state pension at 60. These are women who were already within 10 years or so of pension, of the age 60. And yet it still didn't bother to write to them, to tell them clearly about that change. Now, what the Ombudsman suggests is that that is maladministration. It's even worse than that, because the government did write to millions of women around that time to tell them what sort of level of state pension or contribution record they had. But in that letter, never mind in big red letters at the top, they didn't actually tell them, well, check what your pension age is, because women's pension age from 2010 is not going to be 60 anymore. So women got this letter about their pension, had no inkling that they needed to worry about whether they'd get it at 60, because every other woman they'd ever known got it at 60. And then suddenly found that this wasn't happening. And on top of that, in 2011, I was campaigning so hard to try and get the government not to put a second increase on women's state pension in. But unfortunately, Parliament didn't listen. So that legislation was passed. And we are where we are now.
I've got a question from Andrew Tweedy, who's alumnus and chief exec of the Royal Society for Support of Women in Scotland, based in Edinburgh. And Andrew asks, where would you target support from benevolent organisations towards women on the state pension, but with low pension incomes, or women below a state retirement pension age who are struggling to find or return to work, and so living on low incomes before they can claim their pension? So it's about the targeting support.
Yeah, really good question. And that sort of relates to what I was saying about this flexibility in pension age. I do think we need some provision for early access to state pension for those who genuinely can't work. Or indeed to recognise the fact that they're caring for loved ones, which saves society quite a bit of money, but they get no recognition for it. So those in greatest hardship would be those not yet at state pension age, who don't have private pensions built up because of the circumstances of their early life. And I think they need particular targeting. And then those at the other end of the scale, the single elderly women who are struggling to choose between heating and eating. And they really are, in many cases, in that position. So encourage take-up of pension credit among the older ones, maybe give access to pension credit early for some of those who genuinely can't work and are really struggling to make ends meet.
Thank you. I've got, we haven't got time for very many questions, but I've got a question here from Dawn Hill, who asks, what measures can be put in place to encourage self-employed young women to save towards their pensions?
Again, I think that's an excellent question. Gosh, it's wonderful to have an audience that is so on the ball and engaged and is asking some really good, challenging topics. I would venture to suggest that part of the problem we have is the pensions industry itself. Now, in my view, pensions are a brilliant product. A private pension is for almost everybody a brilliant way to save for later life, because you get free money. If you're in a workplace pension scheme and your employer is paying in alongside you, and you get tax relief, whether you're on basic or higher rate tax, very often the employer gives a 2-to-1 match, even if they match you pound for pound. Where else can you get a £50 note for something more like £20 or £30? And that's what pensions do. But the pensions industry never talks about that. They seem to talk about the fact that you're not putting enough in, and they talk in jargon and language that nobody would understand. I would argue that the policy of autumn enrolment, with workplace pensions bringing millions of people into pension saving for the first time, was a golden opportunity for the pensions industry to find clever new ways to reach out to customers and engage them. Which other consumer industry, consumer good, has government forcing customers to buy it and government subsidizing it And then that industry comes back to government and says, well, you haven't given us enough, we want more. Usually that industry would be expected to market to those new customers and say, look, you're doing brilliantly, you're in this pension scheme, it's going to do you fantastic good, it can do all these great things. Why don't you look at doing a bit more? And if employees looking at that understand the message, it will spill over to the self-employed as well. It's a harder sell to the self-employed because you don't have the free money, if you like, from the employer, but you still get extra from the government. And perhaps pension providers should be looking even at gimmicks, which they often reject. And I don't know why, but what about a lottery attached to self-employed pensions? You know, every month, somebody who's put money into a prudential pension or a nest pension or whatever pension it is, will be entered for a draw to win some life-changing sum of money or a large sum of money. That means you can then tell people that there's something in it for them now, not just maybe in many years' time, but there's a chance of something now. People play the lottery and never get their pound back. This would be a lottery attached to something that's building up for you in later life. So
it's about sell then, it's about making it.
We've never marketed pensions as an attractive product, and they are a great product.
Thank you very much for that. I think we're going to have to end it there. It's been a real pleasure for me, and I hope for all of you who've been listening to hear Ros Altmann talk today. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get through all of what you wanted to ask, but it was good to hear from so many of you. Thank you, Ros, for taking part. We're really grateful you could find time in your busy schedule, and it was great to have you with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.